The auctioneer's gavel struck with finality, echoing across the dusty square of Silver Creek, Colorado, as Tessa Lowell's heart plummeted to her stomach. $5. The sum of her worth in this merciless frontier town on a sweltering August day in 1876 was merely $5 less than the cost of a decent pair of boots. Sold. To the gentleman in the back for $5, the auctioneer announced with casual indifference, as if he hadn't just traded a human life for pocket change. Tessa stood on the wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope, her copper hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. Weeks of travel west with her uncle had culminated in this betrayal, abandoned in a strange town, accused of theft, and forced into an indentured servant auction to pay her debts. It was all lies, of course, fabricated by her uncle after she'd rejected the advances of his gambling associate. But the truth held little value in a place where justice bent to the will of those with money and influence. Her eyes searched desperately for her buyer among the sea of sun-weathered faces, most of whom had already lost interest now that the spectacle was over. Then the crowd parted, and her gaze locked with a pair of eyes as blue as a mountain lake. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to announce his presence. Tall and broad-shouldered, with tawny hair that brushed the collar of his worn leather vest, he approached the platform with measured steps. The silver star pinned to his chest caught the afternoon sunlight. Quinn Abernathy, the town sheriff, introduced himself, his voice low and steady as he examined the bill of sale thrust into his hand by the auctioneer. His expression revealed nothing as he folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. The auctioneer grinned, exposing tobacco-stained teeth. "She's all yours, Sheriff. Though I reckon at $5, you got yourself a poor investment." Quinn's eyes never left Tessa's face as he replied, "You're wrong there. She's worth more than any fortune." Without elaboration, he climbed the steps to the platform and gently untied her hands, his calloused fingers careful against her raw skin. Tessa stiffened, confusion warring with fear. She'd heard stories of the frontier lawmen, some honorable, others no better than the outlaws they hunted. Which was he? "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "Not here," Quinn murmured, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. "Too many ears." He guided her down the steps and through the dispersing crowd. Some men snickered and called out crude suggestions that made her cheeks burn with indignation, but Quinn silenced them with a steely glare that promised consequences. They walked in silence down the main street of Silver Creek, past the saloon where raucous piano music spilled into the afternoon air, past the general store where women in modest calico dresses paused their shopping to stare openly at them. Tessa squared her shoulders despite her threadbare dress and the layers of trail dust that clung to her skin. 22 years of life had taught her that dignity was often the only thing a woman could claim as her own, and she would not relinquish it easily. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked as they approached a whitewashed house at the edge of town, its small porch adorned with a rocking chair and clay pots of hardy desert flowers. "My home," Quinn answered, opening the gate for her. At her wary expression, he added, "Mrs. Holloway from the boarding house will be joining us shortly. I sent word ahead." "And why would you do that?" Tessa challenged, finding her voice at last. Quinn paused, his expression softening slightly. "Because, Miss Lowell, I have no intention of giving this town any more reason to talk." He gestured toward the door. "Please, you're safe here." Those 3 words, "you're safe here," nearly undid her composure. How long had it been since she'd felt safe? Since her parents' deaths from influenza 2 years ago, she'd been passed between reluctant relatives, ultimately landing with her father's brother who saw her as little more than a burden to be used or discarded as convenient. The interior of Quinn's home was modest but meticulously kept. A simple kitchen opened to a small sitting area furnished with a sofa, armchair, and bookcase surprisingly well stocked for a frontier lawman. A closed door presumably led to his bedroom, and stairs to what might be an attic or second room. "Please sit," he offered, gesturing to the sofa. "There's clean water in the pitcher if you're thirsty." Tessa remained standing, unwilling to surrender her guard. "Why did you buy me, Sheriff Abernathy? What do you want?" Quinn removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him seem suddenly younger. Perhaps not much older than her own 22 years. Though responsibility had carved lines around his eyes that suggested otherwise. "I didn't buy you, Miss Lowell. I stopped an injustice." He placed his hat on the table and met her gaze directly. "That auction was illegal. I've been trying to put a stop to these so-called debt auctions for months, but Judge Harmon is in Maxwell's pocket, and Maxwell owns the saloon where most of the town's money changes hands." "Maxwell," Tessa repeated, the name stirring recognition. "My uncle's friend, the one who accused me of stealing his watch." Quinn nodded grimly. "Thaddeus Maxwell has a history of targeting women traveling through. Usually, he waits until their companions leave them unattended, plants something valuable among their possessions, then discovers the theft." "Your uncle was either fooled by him or complicit." "Complicit," Tessa said without hesitation. "Uncle Edgar knew exactly what he was doing when he left me behind." A sharp knock interrupted them, and Quinn admitted a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Holloway, thank you for coming," Quinn greeted her. "This is Miss Tessa Lowell." The older woman assessed Tessa with a sympathetic gaze. "You poor dear. Another of Maxwell's victims, I presume?" "I've explained some of the situation," Quinn confirmed. "Mrs. Holloway runs the boarding house for respectable women in town. I've arranged for you to stay there until we can sort this matter out." Tessa blinked in surprise. "You're not keeping me here? But you paid $5 to interrupt a corrupt system," Quinn finished firmly. "That paper doesn't make you my property, Miss Lowell. It doesn't make you anyone's property." Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "The sheriff is one of the few good men in this town, dear. Though Lord knows we could use more like him." For the first time since the nightmare began, Tessa felt something like hope flutter in her chest. "I have no money to pay for lodging." "We'll worry about that later," Mrs. Holloway assured her. "For now, I think a hot bath and clean clothes are in order. I believe my niece left some dresses that might fit you when she moved to Denver." Quinn cleared his throat. "There's one more thing, Miss Lowell. Until I can prove Maxwell's scheme, it would be safer if people believed you were working off your debt through legitimate employment. Mrs. Holloway has agreed to hire you as her assistant at the boarding house. A ruse, of course," Mrs. Holloway added quickly, "though I wouldn't turn down genuine help if you're willing. Running that place alone isn't easy at my age." Tessa looked between them, these strangers offering kindness when she'd expected the worst. "Why are you helping me?" Quinn's expression darkened. "Because I couldn't help the others. Because I was away when they auctioned Mary Collins 3 months ago, and by the time I returned, she'd been taken across state lines where my jurisdiction ends." The unspoken fate of this unknown woman hung heavy in the air between them. "I'll take your offer, Mrs. Holloway," Tessa decided, straightening her shoulders, "and I'll help you find evidence against Maxwell, Sheriff. I'm not without resources of my own." Quinn studied her with newfound interest. "What kind of resources?" "I was my father's bookkeeper for 5 years before he died. He was a merchant in Boston. I know how to find discrepancies in accounts, and men like Maxwell always leave traces of their crimes in their ledgers." A small smile curved Quinn's mouth, transforming his serious countenance. "Miss Lowell, I believe Silver Creek just got more interesting." Mrs. Holloway escorted Tessa to the boarding house, a well-maintained 2-story building 3 streets over from the sheriff's home. After the promised bath, her first real one in weeks, Tessa stood in a borrowed blue calico dress, feeling human again as Mrs. Holloway brushed and braided her long copper hair. "The sheriff's a good man," Mrs. Holloway remarked as she worked. "Lost his parents young, raised by his grandfather who taught him right from wrong. Been our sheriff for 4 years now, and he's turned down offers to move to bigger towns." "Why would he stay here?" Tessa asked, genuinely curious. "Says someone needs to stand between the good folks and the bad elements. Silver Creek sits at a crossroads. It could become a decent place for families or another lawless outpost. Quinn believes in fighting for the former." Tessa contemplated this as she was shown to a small but clean room at the back of the boarding house. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear, though her dreams were filled with blue eyes and unexpected kindness. The next morning, she began her new role, helping serve breakfast to the 6 women currently boarding, mostly school teachers and a seamstress. The routine work was comforting after so much uncertainty, and she quickly learned the rhythm of the house under Mrs. Holloway's gentle guidance. Quinn arrived mid-morning, hat in hand, asking if Tessa might accompany him to the general store to acquire necessary items. Mrs. Holloway gave her blessing with a knowing smile that made Tessa wonder just how transparent her growing interest in the sheriff might be. "I thought we might discuss strategy," Quinn explained as they walked down the boardwalk, keeping a respectable distance between them. "Maxwell keeps his books at the saloon, but getting access won't be easy." "Does he have a regular bookkeeper?" Tessa asked. "He has a man named Parsons who comes in once a week. Not particularly bright, from what I've observed." Tessa considered this. "What if you created a distraction? Something that would require Maxwell's attention while I examine the books." Quinn looked at her with surprise. "You're suggesting breaking the law, Miss Lowell?" "I'm suggesting creative investigation, Sheriff," she countered with a raised eyebrow. "Unless you prefer to wait for more women to be auctioned while you play by rules your adversaries ignore." He studied her for a long moment, then chuckled. "You're not what I expected." "I rarely am," she replied with the first genuine smile she'd offered since arriving in Silver Creek. Over the next 2 weeks, a partnership formed between them, evolving into something deeper as they met daily to plan their approach to Maxwell's operation. Quinn taught Tessa to shoot his spare revolver on a quiet stretch of land outside town, impressed by her steady hand and determination. In turn, she showed him how ledgers could reveal stories beyond simple numbers, explaining how to identify suspicious patterns. Their moments together became increasingly precious to Tessa, who found herself watching the clock until their next meeting. Quinn was unlike any man she'd known, principled yet practical, strong yet gentle, and he listened to her ideas with genuine respect. When their hands accidentally touched over maps or documents, the contact lingered longer each time, neither willing to be the first to pull away. Mrs. Holloway observed their growing attachment with approval, but offered a gentle warning one evening as Tessa helped with mending. "Hearts are fragile things in a place like this," the older woman said. "Quinn's been hurt before by someone who couldn't accept the dangers of his work. Make sure you know your own mind before you let things progress." Tessa considered this as she stitched a torn pillowcase. "I'm not afraid of danger, Mrs. Holloway. I'm afraid of being caged." "Then perhaps you and our sheriff have more in common than you realize." Their opportunity came when Maxwell announced a high-stakes poker tournament to coincide with the cattle drives passing through. The saloon would be crowded, Maxwell distracted, and his office likely unattended during peak hours. "It's risky," Quinn cautioned as they finalized their plan in the privacy of Mrs. Holloway's kitchen after the boarders had retired. "If you're caught—" "I won't be," Tessa assured him, "and if this works, we'll have evidence to present to the territorial judge when he makes his circuit next month. No more women sold. No more lives destroyed." Quinn reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Promise me you'll be careful. I couldn't bear it if—" He stopped abruptly, as if he'd revealed too much. Tessa's heart raced at the unfinished sentiment. "If what, Quinn?" His blue eyes held hers, all pretense of professional distance abandoned. If anything happened to you, these past weeks, you've become important to me. The admission hung between them, simple yet profound. Tessa turned her hand to intertwine their fingers. You've become important to me, too. The night of the tournament arrived clear and cool, stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. Tessa dressed carefully in one of the borrowed dresses, this one a rich burgundy that Mrs. Holloway had altered to fit her perfectly. For luck, the older woman said, pressing a cameo brooch into Tessa's palm before she left. It was my mother's. I've always believed it has protective properties. Quinn waited at the corner, dressed not in his usual sheriff's attire, but in the garb of a prosperous rancher, his star nowhere in sight. His eyes widened appreciatively when he saw her. You look beautiful, he said simply. And you look nothing like a sheriff, she returned with a smile. That's the idea. I'm just another player looking to win big tonight. Maxwell doesn't know I'm onto his scheme. Their plan was straightforward. Quinn would join the tournament, establishing himself as a serious player. 2 hours in, he would accuse another player, actually his deputy, in disguise of cheating, causing enough commotion to draw Maxwell and his security from their posts. In the confusion, Tessa would slip into Maxwell's office through the back entrance and examine his books. The saloon was already crowded when they entered, smoke hanging heavy beneath the tin ceiling, piano music competing with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. Maxwell himself stood at the bar, a corpulent man with small, calculating eyes that immediately fixed on Tessa. Well, well, he drawled, moving to intercept them. If it isn't our local lawman and his purchase. He said the last word with deliberate crudeness. Quinn's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Evening, Maxwell. I'm here to try my luck at cards. And the lady? Didn't figure her for a gambling woman, considering her last bet cost her freedom. Maxwell's gaze roamed over Tessa with insulting slowness. Before Quinn could respond, Tessa stepped forward. My circumstances have improved considerably since we last met, Mr. Maxwell. I find that fortune favors those who recognize true value. She placed her hand on Quinn's arm in a gesture both possessive and defiant. Something ugly flashed in Maxwell's eyes, but he forced a smile. Indeed it does. Enjoy the tournament, Sheriff. May the best man win. As he walked away, Quinn leaned close to Tessa's ear. That was either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both, she admitted. But he needed to see me as confident, not cowering. It makes our charade more believable. Quinn guided her to a table near the poker game, ordered her a sarsaparilla, and with a gentle squeeze of her hand, joined the players at the main table. Tessa sipped her drink slowly, watching the room while appearing to watch only Quinn. The next 2 hours passed with excruciating slowness. Quinn played well, building a respectable pile of chips while maintaining conversation with the other players. Maxwell circulated through the room, occasionally pausing at the poker table to observe, his expression souring as Quinn continued to win. Finally, right on schedule, Quinn's voice rose above the general din. What the hell do you think you're doing? He stood suddenly, upending his chair as he confronted the man across from him, Deputy Wilson, who played his part perfectly, responding with equal outrage. Within seconds, other players joined the argument, chips scattered, and a bystander was shoved into a serving girl, sending drinks crashing to the floor. Maxwell rushed forward, bellowing for order, his security men following in his wake. Tessa seized her moment, slipping through the crowd toward the back hallway. The office door was locked, but the hairpin technique Mrs. Holloway had surprisingly demonstrated proved effective. Within moments, she was inside the dimly lit room. Working quickly, she located the main ledger in the desk drawer and began scanning entries, copying key information into a small notebook hidden in her sleeve. The pattern emerged almost immediately. Maxwell's debt collections recorded as miscellaneous income. The women's names coded but recognizable to someone looking for the pattern. She was almost finished when the doorknob turned. Heart pounding, Tessa barely managed to return the ledger and conceal herself behind a large cabinet when the door opened. Ridiculous commotion, Maxwell muttered to himself as he entered, moving directly to a wall safe Tessa hadn't noticed. He opened it, removed something, and turned to leave, but paused, sniffing the air suspiciously. Tessa held her breath, pressing herself against the wall as Maxwell slowly surveyed the room. He took a step toward her hiding place. A crash from the saloon, followed by shouting, drew his attention. With a final glance around, he hurried out, locking the door behind him. Tessa allowed herself 3 deep breaths before emerging from her hiding spot. The safe remained open, and inside lay a leather-bound journal different from the business ledger. Making a split-second decision, she removed it, tucked it into her bodice, and made her escape through the window. The cool night air hit her flushed face as she rounded the building, nearly colliding with Quinn, who waited in the shadows of the alley. "Did you get it?" he asked urgently. "Better," she replied breathlessly. "I found his private records." They hurried back to Quinn's house, taking a circuitous route to ensure they weren't followed. Once safely inside, Tessa produced the journal, and together they pored over its contents by lamplight. "This is it," Quinn said in disbelief as they read Maxwell's detailed accounts of his operation, names of women, prices paid, buyers, and his cut of each transaction. "He's been running this scheme across 3 territories for years. There are dozens of women listed here. And accomplices," Tessa added, pointing to a list of names that included her uncle. "This is enough to put him away for decades." Quinn looked up at her, his expression a mixture of triumph and admiration. "You're remarkable, Tessa Lowell." The use of her first name, so natural and right on his lips, sent warmth spreading through her. "We did this together," she corrected gently. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I need to get this to Judge Reynolds first thing tomorrow. He's an honest man. He'll issue the warrants." "And then?" "And then," Quinn said softly, "Maxwell's reign ends, and perhaps Silver Creek can become the town it's meant to be." What remained unspoken was the question of Tessa's future. With her name cleared and Maxwell exposed, nothing would bind her to Silver Creek, nothing except the man sitting across from her, whose gaze held promises neither had yet voiced aloud. The next morning brought swift justice. Judge Reynolds issued arrest warrants for Maxwell and his accomplices based on the evidence in the journal. By noon, Maxwell was behind bars, his face purple with rage as Quinn read the charges against him. "This isn't over, Abernathy," Maxwell spat through the cell bars. "I have friends in high places." "Not anymore," Quinn replied evenly, placing the journal in the evidence box. "Your friends are scrambling to save themselves now that your operation is exposed." News spread quickly through town. Women gathered outside the sheriff's office, some seeking information about relatives sold into servitude, others simply wanting to witness Maxwell's downfall. Mrs. Holloway arrived with fresh bread and coffee for Quinn and Tessa, who'd been answering questions and recording testimonies since dawn. "You've done this town a great service," Mrs. Holloway told them, her eyes misty with emotion. "Both of you." By evening, telegrams had been sent to neighboring territories, and 3 more arrests made. Exhausted but satisfied, Quinn walked Tessa back to the boarding house under a sky painted with the fiery colors of sunset. "What will you do now?" he asked as they paused at the gate. "You're free to go wherever you choose." Tessa studied the man before her, the man who had valued her when others saw only profit, who had risked his position to fight an injustice, who looked at her now as if his future happiness hung on her response. "I've been thinking about that," she said carefully. "Mrs. Holloway has offered me a permanent position helping manage the boarding house." She's even suggested I might take over when she retires. Hope flickered in Quinn's eyes. And is that something you'd want? It depends, she answered, taking a step closer to him. I've grown fond of Silver Creek, despite our rough introduction. But my decision to stay would depend on certain attachments. Attachments, he repeated, his voice dropping lower as he closed the remaining distance between them. I hope I might be counted among them? Tessa smiled up at him. The most important one, in fact. Quinn's hands came to rest gently on her waist. In that case, Miss Lowell, I should tell you that I have no intention of letting you go now that I've found you. Is that so, Sheriff Abernathy? She teased, her heart racing as his face lowered toward hers. That's so, he whispered against her lips before claiming them in a kiss that held all the promise of new beginnings. 6 months later, on a clear spring morning in 1877, Tessa Lowell became Tessa Abernathy in a ceremony attended by the entire town of Silver Creek. The boarding house, now under her management with Mrs. Holloway serving as advisor, had become a haven for women seeking fresh starts in the West. Maxwell had been sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison, his network dismantled, and several of his victims located and offered restitution from his seized assets. Quinn's reputation as a man of unwavering justice had spread, bringing honest businesses and families to Silver Creek, gradually transforming it into the community he had always believed it could be. As Tessa and Quinn stood on the porch of their home, the same whitewashed house where he had first offered her safety watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, she reflected on how drastically her life had changed since that terrible day at the auction. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, his arm warm around her waist. "I was thinking about value," she answered, leaning into his embrace. "How someone once thought I was worth only $5. Quinn turned her to face him, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. "And I meant what I said that day, you're worth more than any fortune." Tessa smiled, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "As are you, my love. As are you." In the years that followed, their partnership continued to flourish. The small whitewashed house expanded to accommodate their growing family, first a daughter with Tessa's copper hair and Quinn's blue eyes, then twin boys who inherited their father's sense of justice and their mother's quick mind. Silver Creek evolved into a thriving town where women could walk freely without fear, where justice prevailed regardless of wealth or status, and where the story of the sheriff who bought a woman's freedom for $5 became legend, a reminder that in a world often governed by greed, true value could never be measured in dollars and cents, but in courage, integrity, and love.